I want to look at high power pedaling again. And so if we look at the left wall here, I'm going to take cuts through this data surface at 59, 69, and 79 RPM that will show me heart rate versus watts. And then I'm going to take cuts against the first parallel to the back wall at 148, 158, and 168 heart rate, which will show me RPM versus power. We have three power versus heart rate curves. The lower one in yellow is at 79 RPM. The second one, magenta, is at 69 RPM. And the top one in blue is 59 RPM. The first thing you notice is that jumping down from 79 to 69, there's only about 11 watt increase in power. But going from 69 down to 59, there's 27, maybe even 28 watts increase in power. Now if you look at the left side, at low heart rates, there's an increase of maybe 4 watts per heartbeat, 3.5, something like that. But when you get to 169 heartbeats, there's only a difference of about half a watt between 169 and 170. So it shows diminishing returns at higher heart rates. Here are three power versus cadence curves taken at 148 heartbeats, 158 heartbeats, and 168 heartbeats. The big difference between 148 and 58 is over 25 watts. When you move on up to 168 heart rate, there's only an increase of maybe 13 watts. So that shows the diminishing returns of going to higher heart rate. Again, what's very interesting here is that there isn't much difference at cadences of 80 to 75 in terms of power, but the big differences come at the low cadences. Between 60 and 59, 59 and 58, there's a 4 watt increase with just one drop of cadence. That's a huge increase. And this is not what we saw in our efficiency curves. In the efficiency curves, when you're close to optimum, which might be down around 50 or 55 or 60, there was very little change. It was when you got far away from optimum that you had a high rate of inefficiency. But here the rate of power increase is very large at small changes of RPM in around 60 plus or minus a few. So there is another mechanism besides efficiency going on here, and I think it has to do with muscle motor unit recruitment. This is a schematic of a hypothetical muscle. It's got 10 equal-sized muscle motor units. It's got neurons activating each of those motor units, and it's got arteries flowing to each of the motor units, becoming capillaries and encircling them and providing blood to them. Each of the muscle motor units has mitochondria in it, these little brown spots. Mitochondria produce ATP aerobically. They use oxygen to process glucose, oxidize the glucose, producing ATP, using the electrons from that to produce ATP. Now, if you're riding at 55 RPM, going 100 watts, using all of these because you're putting a lot of force on the pedals, then you're going to get each one working at a 10 watt rate. If you decide for some reason to ride at 92 RPM, you'll put less force on the pedals and you will recruit fewer muscle motor units. Now, in that case, you would be recruiting only 60% of these muscle motor units. The blood coming to them would give up its oxygen because of the carbon dioxide flowing out from all the activity, and it becomes blue blood flowing back to the heart. But at the same time, you've got 4 muscle motor units that aren't being used at all. They're not contracting. They're not being innervated. The neurons aren't activating them. They're not contracting. They're not producing CO2. They're not, which knocks oxygen off the hemoglobin. So the blood just flows through, holding on to its oxygen, while these motor units go on vacation. The net result is that part of the motor units work very hard, 67% harder than they had to. Now, they can't do that unless they get more oxygen. They may have the capacity to produce 16 watts, but without the oxygen, they can't do it. And that oxygen is not going to come from these other motor units. That blood is flowing through and back to the heart. It's not going to come back. So the heart has to pump harder. You have to breathe harder. You have to get more oxygen to these by just the heart pumping harder. And we saw that when I went from 55 to 88 RPM, my heart beat about 12 times harder, enough to produce 50 more watts, 48 more watts. So it's almost here like the heart has to beat hard enough to produce 167 watts overall for the whole body. Actually, it's probably more like 150 because these muscles aren't as efficient now because they're working faster. And so maybe you actually have to use 7 motor units, and that's 14 watts per, and that would be like the whole body having 140 watts. And gee, that would be an increase of 10 beats, just about what I saw in my experiment. Now, muscle motor units aren't like this. They're actually different sizes. The small ones were recruited first. Let's look at those next. This is a realistic distribution of slow twitch motor units. Taken from a mouse soleus muscle, they found that some of the motor units were 2% of the total force, and some were as much as 8% of the total force of the muscle. I've used 100 pounds so that it's easy to talk about pounds or force as the same equivalency, and 100 pounds is pretty reasonable for cycling, although I think our muscles actually have more like 150 to even 200 pounds of force with slow twitch muscle, depending on the person. Now, 1 pound or 1 unit has 2 pounds, as I said. You start recruiting from the small units on up so that you can do fine motor actions. You wouldn't want to recruit starting with 8 pounds because you couldn't put the thread through the eye of a needle, for example. Now, if you ride at 150 watts at 90 RPM, you're going to put about 20 pounds of pressure on the pedals on average. And because you only are effective for about 2/3 of the pedal stroke, you're going to max out at about 30 pounds of force, which means you'd have to recruit the first 11 motor units. And that would represent just over 30% of your maximum force that you could generate with your slow twitch muscle. Now, 30% is not much, and the fact is tomorrow when you ride you're going to recruit the same 30% of the muscle, and the day after the same 30%, because you start with the slow twitch and with the small motor units and select going on up. That says you've left 70% of your muscle unused, 70% untrained. Now if you pick a higher gear and pedal slower, you'll use much more of your muscle. When I'm riding up a hill, I might have been using 19 motor units, and then when I shifted to my really big gears, jumped up to about 22 of my motor units. Now when you do that, you go from, in the case of 19, I went from about 71% of my muscle to using 85 or 84% of my muscle. So I'm fairly, 93% of my muscle. So I went up to 92% of my muscle. So that's a large increase in the amount of muscle I used. And since it's about a 20-pound increase over 70, it's a large percentage increase. Now what happens when I've shifted down from, say, riding at 240 watts and 74 RPM to 294 watts at 59 RPM, 14 RPM, but I've increased the amount of muscle I'm using by 24%. And increase, actually I'm getting 24% of the absolute value. It's a larger increase in the actual amount of muscle I'm using, and that muscle is full of mitochondria. I've now got available to me 24-28% more mitochondria, which can produce that much more ATP and that much more power. And that's why I'm getting a big step increase in my power as I go to lower RPM, because a small change in RPM at this level isn't that small, because I have to shift a gear. I'm going to have to recruit 8% more force on the pedals at least, and that's going to move me up to a whole new motor unit, maybe 2 or 3 new motor units, and that's going to produce a lot more power. It's going to do it aerobically because it's got a lot of mitochondria, has tremendous ATP potential that I wasn't using before. So if you choose to ride at high RPM, you're leaving a lot of your ATP, a lot of your mitochondria and ATP and power production potential unused. If you want to be aerobic, find as much mitochondria as you can use and use it. Get the blood to as many muscle fibers, use those muscle fibers, use the mitochondria in them to produce ATP, and you'll produce more power at a lower heart rate.